Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever found yourself wondering about something, fundamental to how the country works, but then you realize you only know bits and pieces? Like birthright citizenship. Seems simple, right? Born here, you're a citizen. But it gets complicated. Today, we're going to try and cut through some of that noise. We want to clarify the core meaning, its constitutional basis, how courts have seen it over time, and of course, its role in, major headlines and political debates, especially around the Supreme Court. Our mission here is to give you that kind of well-informed shortcut.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, I think, is how a concept that feels so central to American law, it's also this persistent point of argument, debate. It's a cornerstone, but one that's, constantly being looked at. And it's important to say this right up front. As of today, Friday, June 28th, 2025, the basic legal situation around birthright citizenship, especially that 14th Amendment part, hasn't fundamentally changed because of some brand new major Supreme Court decision. Despite all the buzz, the status quo holds.
Right, so let's get into how we got here. To really get it, we need to trace it back. Look at the constitutional clause itself, that bedrock text. Then the big Supreme Court case that sort of cemented the interpretation. And then, look at the recent political challenges it's faced, very public ones. So maybe start basic. What is birthright citizenship, fundamentally?
Fundamentally, it's the principle that if you're born within a country's territory, its borders, you automatically get citizenship there. It doesn't matter what your parents' nationality or immigration status is. It's sometimes called just solid rate of the soil. Many countries have this.
And in the U.S. context, where does it come from legally?
It's rooted directly in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified back in 1868. Specifically, it's the very first sentence of Section 1, the Citizenship Clause. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Simple as that, almost. Now, it was passed mainly after the Civil War, obviously, to make sure formerly enslaved people were citizens. But the language, as you can hear, is, very broad.
Okay, that phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that sounds like where the wiggle room or the debate might come in. How's that been interpreted?
That's exactly it. That's the phrase people focus on. But legally, historically, its interpretation has actually been quite narrow, quite specific. It basically means if you're born here, you're under U.S. laws, you're subject to its power, you're a citizen. The exceptions are really limited. Think children of foreign diplomats who have diplomatic immunity, or maybe someone born during a hostile military occupation. Very specific cases. Otherwise, the courts have consistently said being born here puts you subject to the jurisdiction.
And that interpretation solidified, you mentioned, with a key Supreme Court case.
Yes, absolutely. The main one, the landmark case everyone points to, is from way back in 1898. It's United States v. Wong Kim Ark. Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco to Chinese parents who were legally resident but couldn't become citizens themselves under laws at the time. He traveled to China and was denied re-entry to the U.S. The Supreme Court sided with him. They ruled definitively that someone born on U.S. soil, even to non-citizen parents, is a citizen under the 14th Amendment. That Wong Kim Ark decision basically established that the right of the soil, just solely, generally overrides the right of blood, just sanguinis, for births in the U.S. It really shaped this broad, inclusive idea of who's an American.
Wow, 1898. It's a long time for a precedent to stand.
It is. Over a century.
But so even with all the talk, especially in recent years, from certain political groups wanting to change this, maybe limit it, no Supreme Court ruling since then has actually chipped away at Wong Kim Ark.
Correct. That's the key takeaway regarding the courts. People often ask, what's the latest SCOTUS ruling, especially around late June when big decisions drop. But as of our date, June 28, 2025, there hasn't been a new Supreme Court case that directly overturns or significantly modifies the core holding of Wong Kim Ark regarding birthright citizenship. The principle of stare decisis Latin for to stand by things decided, basically meaning respect precedent, it carries a lot of weight. Even with changes in the court's makeup, overturning something so established for so long, that would be a really major judicial shift. Unprecedented almost.
Okay, speaking of shifts, let's talk about the political side. Donald Trump's presidency definitely brought this issue to the forefront again. He talked a lot about wanting to end birthright citizenship. What were the actual proposals or actions during that time? And did any specific challenge make it up to the Supreme Court concerning the 14th Amendment part?
Right, that's a critical point. President Trump was very vocal. He called birthright citizenship ridiculous, claimed it incentivized illegal immigration. He floated ideas like trying to end it via an executive order, just declare that the 14th Amendment doesn't mean what everyone thinks it means, or maybe push for legislation. These suggestions immediately sparked huge legal debate. Most constitutional scholars argued quite strongly that birthright citizenship is constitutionally guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, and that you can't just, wipe it away with an executive order. It would almost certainly need a constitutional amendment, which is incredibly hard to pass. Or, theoretically, that huge Supreme Court reversal of Wong Kim Ark we just talked about.
So, lots of talk, lots of debate, but no specific case testing the constitutionality of birthright citizenship itself actually landed at the Supreme Court during his term.
Exactly. His administration was involved in many high-profile immigration cases that did reach the court, things like the travel ban, DACA, border wall funding, but none of those were a direct assault on the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment as interpreted by Wong Kim Ark. The fact that it didn't reach the court directly on that core issue, despite the rhetoric, really highlights how difficult legally it is to challenge such a fundamental, long-standing principle.
That's interesting. Now, when we talk about legal challenges, especially to executive actions or policies, we often hear about injunctions, things like nationwide injunctions. While maybe not used directly for birthright citizenship yet, could you explain those briefly? Why might they be relevant if a serious challenge ever did happen?
Sure. An injunction is just a court order. It tells someone, often the government, to either do something or, more commonly, stop doing something. Now, these nationwide or universal injunctions, they've become quite controversial. That's when a single federal judge issues an order that blocks a government policy across the entire country, not just for the specific people involved in the lawsuit. Critics sometimes call this the imperial judiciary, the idea that one judge is overstepping their bounds. Supporters say it's necessary to stop potentially illegal policies quickly and uniformly. So yeah, we haven't seen one specifically targeting birthright citizenship itself, but if an administration tried, say, an executive order to deny citizenship based on parent status, you'd instantly see lawsuits filed and requests for these kinds of broad injunctions to block the order immediately. It shows the power struggle between the executive and judicial branches in these areas.
Right, that makes sense. It's part of the legal toolkit. Now, shifting focus a bit, is the U.S. unusual in having birthright citizenship? Do other countries do this?
That's a great question. And no, the U.S. isn't alone, although it's maybe less common than it once was globally. While many countries in Europe and Asia follow jus sanguinis, the right of blood, where citizenship comes from your parents just solely, the right of the soil, is actually the norm in the Americas. Think Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. Lots of countries in North, Central, and South America grant citizenship based on birth within their territory. Historically, jus soli was more widespread, but many nations shifted away from it over time, so the U.S. practice fits within a distinct, primarily Western Hemisphere tradition.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. We've covered the amendment, the key case, the challenges, the global context. What's the main takeaway for you, our listener?
Well, it seems clear that birthright citizenship, coming from the 14th Amendment, strongly affirmed by United States v. Wong Kim Ark back in 1898, it's still fundamental U.S. law. That hasn't changed. And despite some very loud political challenges, especially as we discussed from figures like Donald Trump, no Supreme Court ruling has actually altered that basic legal framework. Not as of today, June 28, 2025. Exactly. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, the sheer stability of this principle, upheld for well over 100 years now, it really says something about the power of constitutional precedent in the American legal system. Any real change would likely need one of two things. Either a formal constitutional amendment, which is, notoriously difficult to achieve, or that kind of massive, dramatic reversal by the Supreme Court we talked about, which would be truly extraordinary.
So for you listening, thinking about birthright citizenship isn't just a sort of an abstract legal thing. It's really about understanding a core piece of American identity. And it's about grasping this ongoing conversation, this dynamic debate about who belongs, who is an American, and how we define that.
Which does leave us with a pretty important question to ponder, doesn't it? In today's world, with increasing global migration, shifting ideas about nations and identity, and this persistent political argument here in the U.S., how might this debate over birthright citizenship continue to shape how we think about sovereignty, about belonging, about who we are in the years ahead?
Definitely something to think about. It's a complex principle, deeply embedded, but clearly still very much alive in our national conversation. Worth continuing to explore for sure.